everyone, welcome back to my classroom. This is the second video in a three-part series over Outliers, the story of success by Malcolm Gladwell, specifically chapter 1. The previous video gave an overview of chapter 1, but this video, this is my favorite. This video does a deep dive into chapter 1 so that we can really understand what Gladwell is arguing and how he's presenting his argument. So if you want to do that and take a little deep dive into Malcolm Gladwell's chapter 1 for Outliers, come on into my classroom.
So here we are in the introduction section, and he's giving us this story of the Canadian Hockey League, and he goes through, and as always I've identified for you the vocabulary with color coding. Although this is not the vocabulary video, you can at least see what I've indicated is important, and you can go to vocabulary.com at this link here and you can practice this vocabulary that I've identified. So he has this story, and he's telling us the story of hockey, and this is a very important word here on page 16, meritocracy. Canadian hockey is a meritocracy, and meritocracy is an important aspect of what he's talking about. So you need to understand meritocracy. Meritocracy, if we break that down, we can see the key word in there is merit. And so this is basically rewarding or giving someone status based upon their merit. And a lot of things in hockey and other things are basically a meritocracy. So again, he's explaining this Canadian hockey, he's talking about the general story about it, and he goes through here. If we look at the bottom in the middle of page 17 where he sums up, he says here, success in hockey is based on individual merit, that is, a meritocracy. And both of these words are important. Players are judged on their own performance, not anyone else's, and on the basis of their ability, not on some arbitrary fact. He's stating that as fact. He's saying that Canadian hockey is based on meritocracy, on individual merit. And then he ends the section by questioning what he just told you is true. This is a kind of argument. We're not generally making it at this level because our papers are so much shorter, but it's something that we can do. We can present the counter argument, the generally accepted status quo or reality, and then we can question it. And that's exactly what Malcolm Gladwell does right here. He questions it. He says, players are judged on their own performance, or are they? And this sets us up to realize, okay, maybe Mr. Gladwell is actually going to argue against what he was actually doing. So let's go on then to section 2 and see what he is in fact actually going to talk about. So let's look at what Gladwell is telling us this section and this entire book is going to be about. He states it very explicitly. This book is about outliers, about men and women who do things that are out of the ordinary. So clearly, he is going to show us things out of the ordinary. Just before here, he told us this is normal, this is ordinary, and then he questions it. So clearly, he's going to now show us things to answer his question. He tells us explicitly what he's going to do. Now in our essays, we don't generally say to the reader, this is what I'm going to do, again, because we're doing it so much smaller. But this is a really big book. It is, in fact, over 300 pages. When it's 300 pages, perhaps we can be a little bit more directive. So he tells us what we're going to do here. We're going to uncover the secrets of this. We're going to look at this. And then this is really important on page 18. It is page 18. Yes, it's on page 18. He asks here, what is the question we always ask about the successful? We want to know what they're like. He's drawing our attention to the fact that we're all trying to figure out how to be successful. This book is about how to be successful and the factors that make people successful. And we know that because the very title says the story of success. So again here, he is explaining this. I think right here above this is the thesis. If there is one explicit thesis, I think it's right here. And examining the lives of the remarkable among us, I will argue that there is something profoundly wrong with the way we make sense of success. So he's introduced that with the hook by giving us this idea of this is reality, but is it true? And he's explicitly telling us right here in the thesis, he's going to show us all these different versions throughout the book of success, and then he's going to show us why we even think about success is incorrect. And why might he do that? If we're thinking about success incorrectly, then we can never actually achieve success. So if we understand what success really is, it will help us, the average person, achieve success. So then he goes on through here, and this is the stereotypical, starting here on page 18, he's giving us what we think about success. Remember, he's showing us what we think about success is incorrect. So here, the autobiographies where he's telling us this story, this is basically what we think success is. And he goes on through this to 19, and then here on 19, he starts telling us that it doesn't work. And here is his argument. People don't rise from nothing. We do owe something to parentage and patronage. The people who stand before kings may look like they did it all by themselves, but in fact they're invariably the beneficiaries of hidden advantages and extraordinary opportunities and cultural legacies that allow them to learn and work hard. The culture, the legacies. So, what does Malcolm Gladwell think success is? That is a very important question because he's going to prove that throughout the entire book. He tells us right here, parentage, this is a great word, who our parents were. Patronage, another great noun, who our patrons are, who those support us are, who our mentors are. We have beneficiaries of hidden advantages. So we also have hidden advantages. We have extraordinary opportunities. And we have cultural legacies. We have the culture that we belong to and the background that we come from. So this is what Malcolm Gladwell is saying is important to success. Patronage, parentage, opportunities, legacies, and advantages. And he's going to show that all throughout the book. Then we go on at the bottom of this page to talk about biologists. One of the great things about Malcolm Gladwell is as he gives his examples, he tries to give as many different kinds of examples as he can to resonate with as many people as he can. So he'll have sports examples, science examples, math examples, teaching examples, school examples, business examples. He gives a lot of different kinds of examples. As you read through this book, don't get overwhelmed with the examples. It's not important that you understand every single example. One of Gladwell's techniques is he gives us an idea and then he gives us all these different kinds of examples. So find the ones that work best for you. Here we're talking about biologists, so we're looking about science and nature and that kind of thing. And he gives us this nice little story about the tree. And of course, you know me, under the tree, I love this example. This is a nice little metaphor to help us understand this particular idea of extra hidden advantages and extraordinary opportunities and legacies. So this is something that you might want to look over. Then we go on to Section 3, and we've already established that Section 3 is the hockey example. Now, I'll be honest, I get lost in all these numbers because you know how I feel about numbers, but some people really like numbers. So the thing that I want to point out here is that he's giving us concrete, specific examples. He's not giving us vague information or metaphor. Metaphor is good. And here with the biology, he gives us this lovely little metaphor about the tree. But here in section 3, he's giving us concrete examples of all these different hockey players. So he gives you this example here, and he asks you with a rhetorical question to see if you can spot anything. He wants you to go and look for it yourself. He wants you to read like a writer and find the information before he explains it to you. At the end of all this chart, he actually asks you directly, do you see it? And then he explains to you, don't feel bad if you don't see it, because lots of people don't see it, but he's going to show it to you. When we look at the tone, he's using second person here. Why? Because he's talking to us directly. He's trying to have a conversation with us directly. Keep in mind with your essays, we are going to be a little bit more formal, and we're not going to be doing that. So then he's explaining this whole big example with the with the hockey and what it means. Then he goes through. This is all example. Now he's got words to go with all the data he gave us. Here then in section 4, this is really what we want to focus on. In section 4, he gives us the explanation. He first tells us what it's not. It's not astrology. This is what it's not. It's not magic. This is what it's not. What it is an eligibility cutoff. What it is age. It's age. The 12-month gap in age represents an enormous difference in physical maturity. So what he's saying actually is giving these particular hockey players an advantage is age. Birth date, which they don't control. We don't control our birth date. We're born when we're born. So he's giving us this. And he goes on then to explain that and explain how they're chosen and why the age is so much important. So here, all of this, all the way until the almost bottom of page 25, he's making the argument about age, the age closest to the cutoff date. Then he goes on to talk about the United States. He was talking about Canadian hockey, but he's now talking about United States. So he's giving us another kind of example, football and basketball. Don't select, stream, and differentiate quite as dramatically. They're not as extreme as Canadian hockey. Nonetheless, a child can be behind physically, but they're not as behind. But in baseball is much more similar to Canadian hockey. So again, we have all this information on hockey. Then he shows us how football and basketball in America are different, but how baseball is the same. So we have to understand the way Malcolm Gladwell is arguing. This is what he does. He's often giving us things that are and things that aren't. So we really have to pay attention when we're reading to that information. He then goes to European soccer. So he's given us Canadian hockey, American football, American baseball, and now we're talking about European soccer, or what the rest of the world calls football. And he explains how that is like hockey and baseball. So we're starting with Canada. Then we're going to America. Now we're applying to the same birth date, giving you an advantage to the entire world, all of which who play football or soccer. And he says the birth date distributions in that sport are heavily skewed as well. So this idea of birth date giving us an advantage in sports is not just for hockey, but it is in fact for the whole world. So now he's going to give us soccer information. Again, we have a chart with specific information, giving us cutoffs and supporting his idea, concrete exemplification. Then on page 28, as we scroll down, he's summarized the information. Then he goes on to analyze. And starting here at the bottom of page 28, he gives us these two economists giving a business perspective of Kelly Burdett and Elizabeth Dewey, using the relationship between the scores and math. So he's telling us how it matters. Why does it matter? Why do the birth dates matter? And here he's quoting huge effect. Notice how he quotes. First, he tells us who this is, then he tells us what they're doing, then he gives us a quote. So we know that we care why this Dewey person, Elizabeth Dewey, told us it's a huge effect. Why do we care? Well, because she's an economist and she knows. And then he explains his quote. This is basically a giant quote sandwich. Here's my introduction, all of this of my quote. Here's the quote, which is only 2 words, but these 2 words are really important when we're talking about economy. Huge effect. And then he uses a explanation phrase. It means, and he explains it. Now in our class, I'm requiring you to do something better than it means. This is because Malcolm Gladwell can get away with that because of all the other things he does and how sophisticated his writing is. Because we are trying to learn more sophisticated writing and better language, I'm requiring a higher level of language from you. So it is not, in fact, wrong to say it means. It means is one way to introduce and explain your quote. However, I'm demanding a higher standard because I'm trying to get you to write better and use better language. So what Gladwell is telling us here is that taking the equivalent 4th graders with birthdays, what does this all say? Here we go. That's the difference between qualifying for a gifted program or not. Basically, he's saying your birth date, your cutoff date, the date you were born, doesn't just affect hockey, doesn't just affect soccer, it even affects math and science tests, and it affects qualifying in school for gifted or not. He gives us another quote from Dewey telling that education is just like sports. We do ability grouping early on in childhood. What that means is just like sports, when you start school, when you're born, actually matters. It gives you an advantage. That is what Gladwell is arguing all the way through. He then gives us a country that doesn't do that. So remember, Gladwell goes back and forth. This is the only country we don't see this going on is Denmark. So Denmark doesn't do that. So Canada does with hockey, America does with baseball, the world does with football or soccer, and we also do it in school. Look at what he says then here. This is really interesting. They put older kids in the advanced stream where they learn better, and the next year, because they are in higher groups, they do even better. So they start out higher because they're older, then they do better because they're higher. And it's a cycle. It's the same thing that he's talking about. It's the giving the advantage to someone who has the particular birth date. Denmark, in opposite, Denmark does something different. Denmark waits to make selective decisions until maturity differences by age have evened out. So this entire section so far, what we're talking about is age cutoff. Then, not just children here in elementary school, these same 2 economists then look at college. And what did they find about college? Students belonging, we're here on page, what page are we on? We're page 29, in the middle of the page. Students belonging to the relatively youngest group in their class are underrepresented by about 11.6. The initial difference in maturity doesn't go away with time. It persists. And for thousands of students, that initial disadvantage is the difference between going to college and having a real shot at the middle class or not. So it's an arbitrary choice of cutoff dates. This made up choice of making these particular dates, the most important dates, affect all these different aspects of life and success, not only in sports, but in college. And now here in section 5, Gladwell is tying all these examples of hockey and education and early birthdays back to success. And here it is in fact defining the Matthew effect. He goes with sociologist Robert Merton, and he tells us what the Matthew effect is. Remember, the name of this chapter is the Matthew effect. He gives us the same quote, and he explains to us what it means. In other words, those who are successful are most likely to be given the kind of special opportunities that lead to further success. Basically, success equals success, and disadvantage leads to further disadvantage. This is, in fact, the whole point of the Matthew effect. He gives us examples. Rich get the biggest tax breaks. Best students get the best teaching and the most attention. And then again, back to the sports, coaching and practice in hockey and baseball and soccer. This is an important sentence right here on page 30. Success is the result of what sociologists like to call a cumulative advantage. This is an important word, a cumulative advantage. What does it mean? Well, it means that as you get advantage, you keep getting advantage. Again, the Matthew effect. So an implication of the cutoff date is the professional player starts out a little bit better. This little difference leads to opportunity that makes the difference get bigger and bigger. That leads to another opportunity which gets bigger, so it is an accumulative advantage. Then we have another implication here on page 31. The systems we set up to determine who gets ahead aren't efficient. So first of all, we have the system set up. Second of all, the system isn't efficient. It's not effective. This is a really good idiom down here at the bottom of page 31. The deck is stacked against you. If your birthday isn't right, then the deck is stacked against you. You're not getting the cumulative advantage. And then he's going to give us more information, more data, more examples. That's what we get in an essay or an argument. We want the fact. We want exemplification. We want specific things that help us. So then he's going to go in and talk about the consequences. Do you see the consequences of the way we have chosen to think about success? Because we so profoundly personalize success, we miss opportunities to lift others onto the top rung. We make rules that frustrate achievement. We prematurely write people off as failures. So we say that people are failures when really the failure could be as simple as the date you were born, a fact that you have absolutely no control of. You cannot control the date you were born, nor can you control these arbitrary cutoffs that society puts on you. So he's making his argument. This is a really important sentence on page 32 and 33. We are too much in awe of those who succeed and far too dismissive of those who fail. And most of all, we become much too passive. We are passive. We believe the lie, according to Malcolm Gladwell. So we need to be more active. He says here, then in the next paragraph on page 33, if we choose to, we could acknowledge that cutoff dates matter. Rather than having this arbitrary system, we could set up 2 or even 3 hockey leagues so we could give everybody an equal advantage. This is about equality. This is about hidden advantages. This is about people getting advantages that society doesn't even acknowledge. Schools could go to the same thing. So again, he starts with hockey, he goes to education, and now we're back to education. This is what would happen if we did it. Students could learn with and compete against other students of the same maturity level. So rather than competing as a child against people who are more mature than you, you could all be equal in the beginning. So why? If we could do it, why don't we do it? Look what he says here. It would be a little bit more complicated administratively. It would be complicated for the administration, but it wouldn't really cost that much more money. So why? Why don't we do it? And then he goes on and says that why? Why don't we do it? That's the question. If it's possible, if we could do it, if we could in fact give everyone an equal opportunity, why don't we do it? And here at the bottom of page 33 is what Gladwell says. Because we cling to the idea that success is a simple function of individual merit. We like that, individual merit. And the world in which we all grow up and the rules we choose to write as a society don't matter at all. We don't want to accept reality. We don't want to acknowledge the reality that where we're born and when we're born and who surrounds us at birth affects our advantage. We don't like that, so we reject it. Then he goes on in section 6 to wrap it all up. He goes back to hockey because he started with hockey and he comes back to hockey. He gives this example of this particular person, how he was always successful. And I love this last paragraph, next to last paragraph here. Those were the ingredients of success at the highest level: passion, talent, and hard work. Gladwell is taking us back to the myth that he says is a myth, that with passion and talent and hard work, we can succeed. But after giving us this passion, talent, and hard work, he reminds us again there was another element. But there was another element, according to Gladwell. And then he goes on to show us again the cutoff date. He was a bigger kid. He was stronger because he was born at the right place. He was one of the lucky ones. What Gladwell is doing here is giving us one more specific example to prove his point. And what is his point? That success requires many things. It requires many things more than simply hard work, passion, and grit. And this is chapter 1 of Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, The Story of Success.
Wow, that was an enormous amount of information, wasn't it? In chapter 1, Malcolm Gladwell is a great writer, but he's really complicated and he gives us a lot of examples and a lot of really great information to support his argument. I hope my explanation of Gladwell helped you understand chapter 1 a little bit more. If you want to do some vocabulary for chapter 1, then there is another video in my playlist and it goes into the vocabulary for chapter 1. If you liked the video or you want to make a comment, you can do that below. Or if you want to subscribe to my channel down there, you can do that as well and get notification when I post new videos. I thank you for coming to Coleman's Classroom today. I hope you learned something. I look forward to seeing you next time in my classroom.